Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to today's event for the growth of the game addressing racial discrimination in hockey. Acknowledging traditional territory is one part of recognizing and moving beyond colonization and strengthening our relationship in a positive way. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. Thank you. Our host for today's session is none other than Harnaryan Singh. Born and raised in small-town Alberta, Harnaryan Singh has risen through the broadcast ranks to become the host and play-by-play announcer on Hockey Night in Canada's Punjabi broadcast, challenging the status quo along the way. Harnaryan also hosts the English side of Sportsnet. As for the NHL, aims to grow in the game, new markets, and diversify its fan base, Harnaryan symbolizes the power sport has to unite people. His growing list of accomplishments includes broadcasting over 700 NHL games, receiving service medals by the Governor-General of Canada. He is the winner of the 2018 Brian Williams Media Award and an ambassador for the Chevrolet Good Deeds Cup and the NHL's Hockey is for Everyone program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aleem, for that very kind introduction. So I am Harnaryan Singh, and I'm very pleased and honored to be with you here today. Welcome, everyone, to MacEwan University's For the Growth of the Game Summit, addressing racial discrimination in hockey. Now, this summit is funded by the Government of Canada's Anti-Racism Program, and, of course, being hosted by MacEwan University. I want to start off the bat to thank our supporters and sponsors, MacEwan University Griffins men's and women's hockey teams, the Oilers Entertainment Group, Apna Hockey, and the Indigenous Sports Council. And just to let you all know, as you can probably see here, we have the lovely Jody Morrison, who is doing ASL interpretation for us, and that's available for everyone on the screen throughout the summit. So today is the United Nations Human Rights Day, and so it's very fitting that we are here today to discuss racial discrimination in hockey, and it was on purpose that this day was chosen for this event by the organizers. We are here today to discuss the topic of racial discrimination in hockey, but we are here to figure out how to do so in meaningful ways, to have an open dialogue. Some of these conversations and stories will be difficult to hear and they will make us uneasy, but this is a necessary first step to get us to a space where we can hopefully provide resources to solve some of these problems. Today, we may not solve the problems, but it is a time to listen, learn, and reflect. We're not here to spread blame. We want to work together to achieve the goal of eliminating discrimination and racism in hockey. We're all here because we're connected to the game we love. And we're all here because we want hockey to not just survive, but we want it to thrive. And we're here because we understand that we need to do this to fix the future of our sport. I was asked today to talk about my observations and experiences and reflect on the impact of racial discrimination in hockey, both on and off the ice. Racism, to me, in my personal definition, is an act or a behavior showing hatred against any individual based on how that individual looks and intolerance of that individual. Now, this is a broad societal issue that unfortunately transcends our sport. And that's going to be a theme in the experiences that I share with you today. Sadly, racism is not new to our sport. We are all aware, hopefully, of the trials, tribulations, challenges, the racism and discrimination that Black and Indigenous hockey players have had to go through throughout the history of hockey. We're hopefully now aware, and I've only been aware of this for the last couple of seasons now, about the Colored Hockey League since the Soul on Ice movie by Kwame Mason came out. And that history, Willie O'Ree, Herb Carnegie, Bev Beaver pretending to be a boy so she could play. But it's not all ancient, old history. No disrespect intended there at all. But there are so many moments of racism in hockey that have happened recently. Do you all remember Game 7 where the Capitals were playing the Bruins in 2012 and Joel Ward scored the Game 7 overtime game-winning goal? In 2012, I was already a hockey broadcaster for Hockey Night Punjabi, and I was watching this and seeing what was going on, and I was appalled and I was shocked. You see what's written there, and you see the words that are being used. Had a white player scored that Game 7 overtime game-winning goal to knock out another team, we wouldn't have been seeing this type of language being used, this type of hatred. Current players, like locally even here, MacEwan University based in Edmonton, Darnell Nurse has come out and talked about it just this year, about how many times the N-word was used against him and what his parents even experienced just being in the stands of hockey arenas. So where does it start? Where do you realize as a racialized person that you're an outsider? Well, it starts in school. When you go to school and your teacher either bypasses or hesitates or totally butchers your name, you know right away, kindergarten, grade 1, you have to put up your hand and say, yeah, that's me. And I had to do that throughout my entire schooling, growing up in a small town in southern Alberta as one of the very few visible minorities. And we like to say that we've made a lot of progress. We have in some certain ways. But just this very school year, my wife, who's a grade 3 teacher, her grade 3 student, a boy, came up to her and said he didn't want to play hockey anymore. And she said, why? And he said because of the kids that he was playing hockey with were making fun of his name. His name, Virat, but spelled V-I-R-A-T. And so because of that, he couldn't handle it anymore, and he decided he was going to stop playing hockey. It was too much for him. But it happens off of the ice as well. I was just at a university conference earlier this year in January. It seems like eons ago with how long 2020 feels, like it's been 10, 20 years, just what we've been all going through with the pandemic. But at that hockey conference, one of the organizers came up beforehand and asked me how to pronounce my name, and I was very appreciative of that. But after the third or fourth time of trying it, he ended up accidentally saying, I just wish it was a little bit shorter. Can't we call you something else? And I didn't have the courage to say anything back. Thankfully, there was another lovely woman standing right there hearing this, and she, unprompted, stepped in for me and said, and put the man in his place and said, well, if we were in Asia or Africa or Japan or anywhere, your name would be the one that would be different and weird for people to say. I reflected on that because there's been so many moments in my life where I've allowed other people to shorten my name to help accommodate things for them. Whereas instead of staying true to myself, my name has meaning to me and it's closely linked to who I am and my identity. Think about this. How many hockey players have gone through their entire minor hockey, maybe even their professional careers, without correcting coaches, teammates, and media about how to properly pronunciate their names? And who knows how many other kids there are like Virat who stopped playing hockey because they were made fun of for being different. And that was the reason they decided hockey wasn't for them. I remember so many specific incidents of racism in my life, discrimination in my life, but unfortunately, so many of them have come inside a hockey rink. So many of those experiences I've had to deal with inside a hockey rink. This is a drawing of a Sikh boy, and if you're a person of the Sikh faith, we keep our hair unshorn, and so underneath our turban or patka or different forms of turban, we keep our hair tied in a bun at the top of our head. And if you can see these racial slurs that are written here, go back to where you came from. Cut that thing off. Disgusting. You Taliban, you terrorist, raghead, go away. Is that a bomb? You freak. You look like a girl. Raghead. Do you wash that thing? Tennis ball head. Don't blow us up. Unfortunately, I've been called all of these things, and the majority of them I've been called inside a hockey arena. And it pains me to say that because I love hockey so much. And I've been called these things when I've been sitting in my seat, or I'm walking in the concourse, or to and from my vehicle where I parked outside the NHL arena, or on public transit full of other hockey fans. I've been called even more things than that were written on that drawing. That make sure you don't fly a plane into the arena. And having beer thrown at my friends and I, or my family and I. Just imagine being at a game with your sister or your wife or your brothers or your friends and having racial slurs said to you, but also having beer thrown at you, and you come home and you're trying to clean off the beer off your jersey thinking, come on, do they have to do that? But thankfully, the love of the game is stronger than what I experienced. In taking consideration of time, I'm going to go through more quickly some of the experiences that I wanted to talk to you about. And I've talked about this before many times, that I've been told, and I was told so many times in my life, that there wouldn't be a place for me in the hockey broadcasting world because of how I looked. But imagine this, that you actually finally make it, you get your foot in the door, and you have someone who's a respected colleague, a national reporter, sitting with you inside a media newsroom, and they say this. You know, Harnaryan, the only reason you're a part of Hockey Night in Canada is because of this Punjabi thing. Otherwise, there'd be no way you'd be a part of it. So you go from one extreme to being told that you don't belong. And then the other extreme where you get in the door and then you're told that you're only there because of a token diversity initiative. It didn't sit well with me what was said to me at that time on that very day. But the fact that I know where I was sitting, what building it was, and who said it to me, it shows me how much it bothered me. At the time, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't have the confidence or the courage. I wasn't comfortable enough in my own skin to be able to respond, not enough life experience. But I know better now. But I remember even after that incident, it wasn't easy to become comfortable in my own skin. Do you all remember this? In 2013, this is 5 to 6 years after Hockey Night Punjabi began, TSN, the sister station in Canada of ESPN, had an episode of SportsCenter, the highlights show, where Gurdeep Ahluwalia, who's a friend of mine now, and Nabil Karim, who we follow each other on social media, they both anchored and hosted that show, SportsCenter, in 2013. And I remember watching it and thinking, wow, this is so cool. Like, I did never imagine that would happen. But I also remember the outrage, the vitriol, the hatred that was on social media and in people's minds. It was shocking. And some of the things that were said when people saw this, when they saw Gurdeep and Nabil hosting, when did TSN move to the Middle East? Hashtag WTF. A couple of terrorists working the night shift on TSN SportsCenter. 2 Arabs on TSN talking about hockey. Interesting. What? Is this TSN Punjabi? And wait for this one. Welcome to SportsCenter. Osama and Saddam here. And I remember initially being so excited watching them, and then I remember thinking immediately after, oh my goodness, just imagine if one of them was wearing a turban. And in 2016, I got that opportunity to be on an English broadcast as a host. And I remember a lot of positive tweets, but I also remember a very significant one that ties into what I thought when I saw Nabil and Gurdeep on TSN. When I was on Sportsnet as a national host, I remember a tweet saying, I don't want my hockey being given to me by a guy in a turban and a beard. I wish I had saved those tweets. And when I was going over this presentation, even last night, my wife decided to tell me about some more that she saw just this year when I was filling in for Gene Principe on Sportsnet for some of the Oilers broadcasts. But moving on, let me talk about the impact. I've given you some, and I've skipped through so many more in the sake of time, but let's talk about the impact. I talked about specific incidents, but the impact is I didn't know where this lack of self-confidence came from until 2020, until the murder of George Floyd, until I started reflecting back and realizing that my entire journey, when I wrote my book, One Game at a Time, and I thought back to all of those moments where people discouraged me from going into hockey broadcasting, all of that planted the seed of doubt. And so when I'm standing there in 2016 for the first time with a mic on national television, or any time I'm on a program, or even with you today, that seed of doubt is something I have to have an inner battle with. And it's pressure, it's anxiety, and there's so much emotion every time I go on the air because it's a lifetime of not only being told that I wouldn't have a role, but watching so much racism and discrimination in the sport that I love. And I was asked to reflect. And in terms of reflection, I know my parents and my in-laws who came in the 60s and 70s to Canada, they experienced a lot more, even tougher and more hardships in terms of racism and discrimination. And I also know my own lived experiences are nothing in comparison to what others have gone through and are going through right now. I want to make that clear that this is just not my story. There's so many people who draw parallels. It's this constant battle of trying to fit in, but not being Canadian enough. And this quote from Dr. Courtney Sito, who we'll hear from later today, in her book, she writes, "The experience of being Canadian in birth, loyalty, sport, and home, but still never being Canadian enough. The sense of being in a place, but not of a place, are anxieties that every racialized Canadian is made to feel at one point or another." And this is not just the story in Canada. This is the story, of course, in America too, and we're watching how race is playing out in the United States. But in saying this, hockey is what I love, and hockey is what I am obsessed with, and it did help me fit in. Hockey is something that I know, had I not had hockey in my childhood, it would have been drastically different and much more of a negative experience had it not been for hockey. One more quote I'd like to share with you before I end. And this is also from Dr. Courtney Sito, the author of Changing on the Fly, a recent book that came out. "Often the voices critical of sport are labeled as those attempting to destroy or eliminate the game, when the reality is that those who rail against the very foundations of the game are usually those who love it the most, understand its value, and know that we can and must do better." And I am one of those people. I look at the game still in a very positive way, despite what I went through. And I know the game can help so many others. It helped me create friendships and rapport with people that I wouldn't have had any sort of relationship otherwise. But we must acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do and a long ways to go. And in closing, for my speech with you today, I would like to end off where I began, saying that we must and we want to work together to achieve the goal of eliminating racial discrimination in hockey. And we're all here because we are connected to this game we love. We're all here because we want hockey to not just survive, but we want it to thrive. And we're here because we understand that we must fix this for the future of our sport. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And that is the end of our first session. Our next session, which is something I'm really looking forward to because we get to hear from the NHL, it will be Power Play, movement, not a moment. So after a 2-minute break, we'll see you in the next session. Thank you for joining us for the growth of the game.